A long time ago, in fact 6 years ago, I started a series of reviews about Herbert West, Maniacal Scientist, and today we get to finish that series as we go beyond Reanimator. Although this film is quite far removed from its Lovecraftian roots, being the second sequel to a film that didn't really try to adapt the source material anyway, I still get to say, welcome back to H.P Lovecraft Month. The last time we left off Reanimator and Herbert West, he just unsuccessfully tried to create a bride and then seemed to be on the verge of death at the hands of his monstrous creations once again. So of course, none of that is important or will be even mentioned in this film. Let's get into it, shall we? Beyond Reanimator starts with two kids telling scary stories in a backyard tent, with one kid taking it a bit far by having a sheep's eye to show off. He also mentions the classic myth about the retina.
When you die, the last thing you see stays on the back of your retina.
That idea is called optography, which is the process of retrieving an image, or optogram, from the retina of the eye. It's been widely debunked. However, what it does do is it shows that the kid is open to more unconventional science, which will be important later when he meets West. Also, the retina image myth was used frequently by authors at the time, including Lovecraft himself in his story Out of the Aeons, in which the image of a great old one was burned into the retina of a priest. The kids are shocked by a big crash outside the tent, and then we get a POV of someone outside the house seeing the sister of one of the kids inside. Both the kids and his sister investigate, finding nothing but each other. However, that's when a zombie with a messed up face appears to kill the sister by gently tapping her head against the wall. And after she's dead, he drinks some milk, with an effect that reminds me of the Dr. Tongue zombie from the very start of Day of the Dead. And of course, these effects are very much the director's Brian Yuzna's style. Cops quickly show up, presumably following the zombie, and gun it down. The kid cries over his sister's body as the camera zooms into her eye, showing what may be burned into her retina. And considering what the kid said about that earlier, you would think it would have some kind of relevance to the greater plot later. But no. The retina thing and the dead sister have nothing to do with anything. Outside, the kid then sees a cop wrestling with a still-alive arm that, for some unknown reason, doesn't really faze anyone. And then West gets bundled into a patrol car, finally being arrested for the multitude of crimes he's definitely guilty of. However, the kid finds one of West's reagent syringes, as we then lead into the opening credits. And I like that the credits start with the classic Reanimator theme, but then transitions into something new. It keeps a thematic connection to the previous films, but also illustrates that this is a new experience. Because if they'd have just used the same theme again, it would look a little bit lazy. And of course, the iconic medical illustrations over the credits works great for keeping with the style of the previous films as well. The film then picks back up a whole 13 years later as we follow a rat in the walls. See what they did there? Because Rats in the Walls is a Lovecraft probably wasn't intentional. The rat is soon caught, and I guess after 13 years of being locked up, West has gotten even more resourceful, as he has hidden makeshift lab equipment hidden in his cell, which he then uses to electrocute the rat. No rats were harmed in the making of this film. The experiment involved some form of light bulb that will be important later, but West is soon interrupted by the guard giving him a new work assignment, and unfortunately for West, the rat he just killed seems to be the pet of a fellow inmate, and considering how he attacks his cellmate, it's gonna be a problem for West when the guard tells him what he saw. The prisoners are let out, and while West is questioned over the missing rat, we're introduced to a new character and doctor to the prison, Dr. Howard Phillips. This is something we'll encounter again this month, and I personally don't feel it's necessary to name drop Lovecraft. After all, you will have already seen his name in either the trailer, the poster, the tagline, or any other kind of marketing. My point is, his name will get dropped just by the nature of all of this marketing and word of mouth. You do not need to put it into the writing as well. More on this in 3 weeks' time. The doctor is taken to the warden, and he's currently with a journalist discussing his favourite form of execution, the electric chair. He is also incredibly creepy, which almost seems like the go-to cliché for prison wardens in films. Phillips interrupts, which the journalist seems happy about, and the warden questions why Phillips would choose to work in a prison when he could have worked anywhere, obviously giving us a clue to his ulterior motive. Phillips is also introduced to the journalist Laura Olney, which is a reference to another Lovecraft story, The Strange High House in the Mist, and its main character, Thomas Olney. And this is something we'll see again. Lovecraft films are plagued with random references to the other stories. It's almost like the filmmakers feel the need to prove their knowledge, which seems pretty insecure to me. The warden questions Phillips on why he carries a medical bag when the prison is fully equipped. It's another nod to Phillips' motives, but it's more of a chance for the film to get a dick joke in there.
Do all doctors have such a personal relationship with their tools?
Phillips requested West as his assistant, and while the warden discusses how dangerous he is, in the yard one of the inmates keels over and looks to be dying. They quickly take him to the infirmary, where West is just hanging out on his own. It's a really quick moment, but it seriously shows how West has got plot immunity. He's left in a room, alone, full of implements and equipment, and no one bats an eyelid. Phillips asks for a specific drug, but they don't have what he needs. So much for being fully stocked. Fortunately, West suggests a different drug they do have, which has a similar effect, and it's clear West can see he's got another doctor who he can manipulate and go along with his experiments. You can practically see the cogs turning as he watches Phillips work and continue to shock the body even though it's no use. He even has the same reaction to patient death as Dan Kane did. After recovering, Phillips reveals he's there specifically because he wants to work with West. He's the kid from the opening, and he still has the syringe of reagent after all this time. Which you'd think would be dust after 13 years. It's not like a syringe is a completely closed system. Despite it being 13 years old, West is confident that he can still use it and injects the dead prisoner. This film takes place 13 years after the last one, and that's no accident, because Beyond Reanimator was released 13 years after Bride of Reanimator, so that's why. And can I just say, just how impressive it is that Jeffrey Combs is able to keep the same demeanour and personality after all those years of not playing the character. It's truly an impressive feat of acting. After the injection, nothing happens, and West, who's usually full of ideas, just resigns himself. Phillips tries to convince him that more can be made, and of course, while that happens, the body reanimates and immediately gets aggressive as a fight ensues. Phillips gets some sedative as the zombie takes a chunk out of a guard's arm. It's probably good that bites aren't grounds for zombification in this series, I guess. And West quickly stabs it with the needle, which doesn't really sedate him at all. He just gets lecherous with the nurse, and is only subdued when the warden shows up, scaring him. He still grabs the warden's dick, though, before finally stopping. And sadly, that's foreshadowing. The prison is locked down, and unfortunately, while trying to come up with a convincing lie, Phillips destroys the last of the reagent. But it doesn't matter, since they're gonna make more, so it's not really a big deal. And before going back to his cell, West reveals this.
My last partner turned state's evidence against me. I'm expecting better things of you.
There's no indication he was definitely talking about Dan there, but I like to think that Kane finally grew a backbone and saw West for what he really was, because make no mistake, West is not the hero of this or any of the other stories. All he brings is death and destruction if given even half the chance. After work, Phillips and Olney leave together, and then the zombie prisoner is confined to solitary in a straitjacket. And because the warden is quite a sadistic arsehole, he just beats him around a bit. The film then wastes no time giving Phillips his own obviously doomed love interest. Although I'm not sure how anyone can form a relationship with someone so horrendously dubbed over.
But progressive educational programs at the state penitentiary.
Are you in a relationship with the woman or the voice? It's just too damn confusing. The next day, or a few days, the time frame's not specific, Phillips has gotten everything West needs to create more reagent. They also have lab space, but there seems to be a difference in ideologies from the start, because Phillips is horrified at the zombie prisoner, but West is pretty dismissive, saying it was the best they could do. The difference is pretty clear. Which is the same position Dan Kane had, but the problem is, West doesn't care about people, and will create as many mindless freaks as he wants in pursuit of the perfect reagent. That's how West works. He uses that desire to help people as flimsy justification for his own experiments. Naturally, it takes a while for reagent to be made, so there's a rather large time-passing montage so we can get straight to the Reanimator goodness, ending with a sex scene between Phillips and Olney, where we learn she's been investigating West. The next day, West is accosted by the inmate still looking for his dead rat, and he says he's going to kill West if he doesn't get it back. But West has other things on his mind, as he and Phillips have perfected their reagent. And of course, West wants to test it immediately and gets the dead rat from the fridge. Oh yeah, cause that worked beautifully on the cat the last time. Meanwhile, Olney is sweet-talking the warden into letting her have more access so she can complete her story. Well, I say she's sweet-talking, but I have no idea who is talking. Seriously, her dubbing is horrendous.
My story isn't working. It's too impersonal.
The warden is still creepy, insisting on being interviewed over dinner, which she agrees to, mainly because she's desperate to get info and thoroughly underestimates the warden. It's not like he's making his creepiness hard to spot. And back with West.
Did you know the human body loses 3 to 4 grams of weight at the moment of death?
What West is referring to there is the weight of the soul and the 21 grams experiment conducted by Dr. Duncan McDougall of Haverhill, Massachusetts. He speculated that the soul had weight and that the body would lose this weight at the point of death, and he did indeed prove his theory. There was just a few problems with the tests. The experiment was conducted on 6 people, not enough for accurate data. 2 of those experiments had to be discarded, leaving only 4, all of which showed weight loss, which reversed itself either over time or immediately. And considering McDougall had extreme difficulty in determining the exact time of death, the experiment was ultimately determined to be invalid. And this is the kind of science I feel West would absolutely despise. So to me, for West to quote this myth at Phillips says one very clear thing. West is openly showing his arrogance and disdain at the good-hearted doctor by spouting pseudoscience at him. Of course, I might be giving the writers too much credit and respecting the character of West too much to expect him to not believe bad science. The rat is injected with reagent and brought back to life with all its aggressive tendencies. However, this time, West isn't just going to do the same thing over and over again like an insane person. He has perfected his experiment. Remember the strange light bulb that captured the rat's soul when it was killed? Soul is, of course, the layman term. West calls it nanoplasm. And once the nanoplasm is introduced to the rat, it's back to being an ordinary rat, as it's not dead anymore. The nanoplasm, as West puts it, tells the cells to grow again. This might be the biggest growth in not just West's experiment, but in his character as well. He doesn't just pig-headedly believe that if he keeps going with the same reagent, eventually it'll work somehow. He is now perfecting and refining his experiment. Obviously, though, it will go wrong. Otherwise, wouldn't be a film, would it? Phillips is surprised to find Olney still in the prison, which gives the film another chance at a sex joke.
That's the way to the hole.
It certainly is.
And Olney wants to speak with the now zombie prisoner, which she does so through bribery. She also rather stupidly lets herself get locked in the soundproof room, with no way to call for help. Yeah, this'll go well. In the yard, West and Phillips approach the rat prisoner, who's looking to shank West, but being given a live rat seems to calm things down, although the rat might not be as docile as it first seemed. And speaking of seeming docile, Olney tries to speak with the prisoner, who's at first unresponsive, but then she sees all the beatings he's gotten from the warden, who then shows up to threaten Olney. The prisoner then bites his ear off, leading to another beating. The warden has been getting increasingly creepy and aggressive throughout the film. Maybe his subtlety was housed in his ear, because from now on, he goes full-on insane arsehole bad guy. Like, for example, making Olney bark like a dog, then tries the expected sexual assault, and finally just kills her when she tries to escape. Because for some reason in the Reanimator series, the only thing just as perennial as zombies is creepy sexual assaulting arseholes. Back with West, he wants to do more experiments with the light bulb, or NPD as he calls it, wanting to put the pet rat's NPD in the zombie prisoner. He gave the rat a different one. Because West thinks NPD is universal, neutral, and not specific between creatures and people. You can already guess how wrong he is on that, can't you? It's at that point a body is brought into the infirmary and it's revealed to be Olney. No! There have been some truly terrible no lines over the years of cinema. No! But that, still one of the worst. And of course, at the sight of a fresh body, West is chomping at the bit to use the reagent. Olney immediately wakes up, of course, crazy like all the other reagent zombies, and back in the cells, a rather convoluted series of events is about to occur. The prisoner zombie has shown up because they thought he was dead and left to wander the place. He pisses off his cellmate by trying to eat his pet. When the guard shows up to break up the fight, the rat is spat at him, biting his nose. He's then attacked, trying to kill the rat, and ultimately seemingly killed but only knocked out by the zombie, and then the prisoner opens up all the cells, leading to a prison riot. Who knew a rat would lead to such chaos? Just before the riot, however, in the lab, Phillips and West are arguing about the use of the rat NPD on Olney. West is his usual carefree self, but Phillips is more cautious. They're given another option, however, when the warden shows up. The warden threatens to ruin Phillips for working with West. He then notices that Olney is still alive, which is a surprise to say the least, and West uses the opportunity to brain the guy unconscious. Fortunately, West isn't stupid enough to use the reagent on him.
2,000 volts of electric current.
Although he seems stupid enough to not know current is in amps and not volts. But I'm sure it'll be fine. West browbeats Phillips into going along with his plan, electrocuting the warden. He does manage to get more NPD though, which has to be better than the rat stuff. Speaking of which, the pet rat bites the prisoner, so obviously he blames West. Maybe that guy should learn that wild rats don't make the best pets. Also, almost all of this shit might not be happening if West had just chose a different rat, of many, to experiment on. In the lab, Olney is given the warden's NPD and she seems a lot better. Well, for a few seconds anyway, until her body starts mutating and then she starts speaking with the warden's voice.
And using me as a guinea pig. And you let him do it.
Not sure if that's something just for the audience though, because neither West nor Phillips notices the very obvious change in voice. And you'd think West would be eager to observe those kind of changes. Olney seems to be switching back and forth between her and the warden, and at the same time, the riot has reached the infirmary, with West once more accosted by the rat guy, and again another character wanting to sexually assault Olney. She breaks free, running off, with Phillips chasing after her, who bravely manages to get out of the prison with the remaining guards, while Olney is still trapped inside, as it's sealed off. You know, in fairness to West, although his experiments certainly contributed to the current chaos, the majority of it isn't really his fault. It mostly comes down to the prison having terrible security procedures and corrupt management. So, hey, that's some kind of progress at least. West knows the situation, so is busy packing, and Olney is still hiding, being chased by the prisoners. She's eventually found by them, but in a clear display of lacking a budget, Olney attacks them with the scene just fading out. Olney just killed all those guys in very gory fashion, all of it off screen. And I have to emphasise I believe it was for budgetary reasons, because if not, then that's a bad misstep on the part of the filmmakers. I wish they had compromised in some way, just to give us glimpses of what's going on, so we can understand what's happening to Olney and why it's so bad. And despite me talking about how much West has grown, in his infinite wisdom, West not only reanimates the warden, but also gives him some NPD as well, so he's fully conscious. Then he deliberately leaves the door open so the rioting prisoners will find the warden and kill him. Seriously, West, why make things harder for yourself? Because we all know this is going to backfire and become a very big problem for him in the foreseeable future. You already killed the guy, West. Isn't that enough, you petty, petty man? Police and SWAT have shown up to get the prison under control, and Phillips uses the opportunity to get back inside, and sooner than even I anticipated, the warden causes problems for West, beating him unconscious and taking the reagent. And in the main part of the prison, the prisoner who has been established to be a drug addict is busy stealing all medication he can get his hands on, when the warden shows up to interrupt. He scares off one of the prisoners and then gets fixated on the guard, who, as I said, looked dead but wasn't. But then the warden fixes that little problem by beating him to death, and then brings him back with the reagent, so the zombies are truly running amok now. And need I remind you that this time, it is all West's fault. After a pretty long time of not knowing what happened to Olney, she wakes up by groping herself and covered in blood, surrounded by bodies with one guy actually torn in half. Which is pretty unbelievable, quite frankly, and another reason why they should have shown glimpses. Just a small convincer to make it all that more credible. One thing that really does work, though, is when Olney's groping hand starts mutating and freaking out, and the effect is really horrible to look at, in a good way. I mean, there's no reason for it to do that, but it's a good effect at least. West wakes up, and of course he can't leave without his bag, so he goes to find it. At the same time, the warden has found Olney, taunting her with a severed arm, and the drug addict steals the bag of reagent. We then see how the warden is taking his sadism to a whole new level, hanging prisoners and keeping them as zombies to hang for however long he wants. And as if to undermine that pretty horrific moment, there's an incredibly stupid moment of the drug addict guy injecting reagent and having a really good time while he does so. And for some bizarre reason, the soundtrack gets pretty close to ripping off Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds. I can't play it here, but seriously, look it up. I genuinely thought the film was going to start playing War of the Worlds. The film then gets pretty damn uncomfortable again, as Philip's nurse is stripped and bitten on the breast by the original zombie prisoner. It's pointless, gratuitous, genuinely awful, and actually lowered my opinion of the film and its filmmakers. But of course, all this scene will do is have a load of feckless morons tell me, "What's your problem? Tits are great," and completely miss the point of why this is so bad. Phillips meets up with West and confronts him about the NPD changing Olney, and of course West is his thoroughly arrogant self.
You are wrong. She changed.
It was a theory.
Oh, God, it's you!
Because let's be honest, that's how West cons everyone he works with. He claims extreme knowledge of something, engendering trust in the partners he works with, conveniently missing out the fact that his knowledge is just what he thinks will happen, not what he knows. And even after proving how untrustworthy he is, he still manages to get Phillips on his side by claiming he can save Olney. West is still only working on theory, and he knows that. They find the warden's zombies perpetually hanging, and Olney is still being terrorized by the warden. I assume she's been slowly backing up through the whole building this entire time. They finally reach the electric chair room, and of course, there's more sexual assault. First groping, and then he makes Olney get on her knees again. Except now, she bites his dick off. See? I told you it was foreshadowing earlier. Olney screams for some reason, which Phillips hears and runs after, while West is once again attacked by his prisoner rival, who now doesn't have any legs, and surprisingly, West is able to overpower the guy and literally throw him away. It's a continuation of my theory that this film is all about empowering Herbert West, and taking his previous disempowerment and turning it on its head. So, instead of never changing his methodology, he's been given a new spark of inspiration. Instead of constantly fighting with everyone around him who disagrees with him, for the most part, he's been given free rein to do whatever he likes in this film. And where previously he would have problems combating the zombies he's created, now he's swinging them around his head like he's an action hero. There'll be one more example of this as well, which we'll get into later. Phillips finds Olney going quite mad over the warden's personality taking over her body, and she starts strutting around like a dominatrix with a corset and suspenders while beating Phillips. So things are getting decidedly fetishy at this point. West finds his reagent being used by the drug addict and strongly suggests he doesn't inject any more. So of course the guy doesn't listen, and in the most Herbert West moments of the film, he just stands there and observes what happens. After all, he never really tested it on living people before, especially not in these higher dosages. You can tell West is horrified as he watches the guy explode from the inside, but he's also intrigued to see what's happening. He takes the guy's popped out eye with him for some reason, and rather comically, the drug addict still asks him if he's got any more drugs after exploding. Except it's a pretty awful effect when you not only can see the wire holding the thing up, the film seemingly didn't even bother to hide it. Phillips and Olney continue to fight, and West finds the warden scrabbling about on the floor when the legless guy jumps at West, and he doesn't even miss a beat, batting him out of the air and killing him. And then even manages to wrangle the warden into the electric chair. Also, rather comically, while this is going on, the fight between Phillips and Olney is ludicrously drawn out, and she just spends the entire time beating the crap out of him. It's simultaneously comical and tedious, because it just keeps going on and on. Eventually, Phillips slices Olney's throat with blood spraying everywhere, and West electrocutes the warden. Again, if he'd have been satisfied the first time, some of this crap might have been averted, or at least been made slightly easier to deal with. West finds Phillips off his nut after decapitating Olney, taking his security ID and managing to get out of the prison while posing to be Phillips. And the film ends with Phillips seeing Olney's head still alive and laughing at him, as he gets his "I'm crazy now" manic laugh for the end of the film. Kinda like the ending to From Beyond. And come to think of it, I never made that connection. From Beyond, Beyond Reanimator? You'd think they'd make the effort and not have similarly named Jeffrey Combs Lovecraft films. Oh, and this time, West doesn't get an ambiguous death at the end. He 100% gets away scot-free. Which is my final point about what this film is. This isn't like the other two. This isn't about West's flawed character and all the chaos he creates. Well, it is, but it's more about making West better than he was and turning him into a full-fledged anti-hero. Beyond Reanimator, for the most part, is just more Reanimator, and for most people that's all it ever needs to be. But for me, by the third film in a series, you really need to be shaking things up quite a bit. This film attempted to do that with the development of the NPD, but it's hardly used and not really the focus of the story. Yes, it messes with Olney a bit, but apart from that, it's just an addition to the reagent. It is great that Jeffrey Combs is able to recreate West's character so exactly after 13 years. But on the flip side of that, West feels like he's in the exact same place he was at the beginning of Reanimator 2. Hell, he feels like he's in the exact same place he was in Reanimator 1. There is some growth there, yes, but there's just not enough to show that the character is capable of more than just the same old shtick. But I will say the effects are still a standout of the series, being made by Screaming Mad George, whose iconic style is instantly recognisable. So that was Beyond Reanimator. Was it worth the 13-year wait? Well, I famously didn't much care for the first film, so perhaps that's not for me to truly judge. Oh, and to give you an idea of where this series was going, Reanimator 4 would have seen Herbert West reanimating the President of the United States. Make your own jokes up for that one. But this has been a rather modest start to Lovecraft Month, considering this film didn't really have anything to do with Lovecraft. But next week, we'll be looking at a film that tried to stick to the source material as closely as possible, which probably isn't as good as it sounds. See you next week for some more H.P Lovecraft month. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to give a massive thank you to all my Patreon donators. Their support really does help a lot. And if you would like to contribute to the channel and gain access to the Deusdaecon Reviews Discord server, the link is in the description below. And if you would like to get more content aside from the reviews, please consider checking out the Twitch channel, where I stream live 5 days a week, 9 PM GMT, with subjects ranging from Let's Plays, discussions, movie watch-along nights, and even building this guy. The link is on the screen and in the description, so hopefully I'll see you there, and on YouTube, I'll see you next week.